Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. The Ancients, written by Imitated self. Lorgrim looked out at the viewing portal from the main observation deck. The variety in designs and purpose of the assembled ships was still something he almost couldn't believe. It was only 200 years ago that the Apollonians had discovered the secret to faster-than-light travel and communication, a breakthrough that had seen the very laws of nature bent to their will. Within a short amount of time, the universe had gone from a lonely and cold place to one filled with adventure and discovery. Of course, it was one thing to find out that there were other intelligent species out there. That had kind of always been suspected. Even many centuries ago, scientists and philosophers postulated about whether other life could be, the strange forms it could take. Writers and artists foresaw wars greater than any other, and alliances stronger still. However, no one was prepared for what lay beyond their own system. Admiral Creel stepped up. "It is quite something to see such a sight. Even after all this time, it still feels a bit too, storybook, don't you think?" Lorgrim smiled and shook his head knowingly. The Admiral was a Mulcahy, one of the first races that had connected with. Their homeworld consisted almost entirely of their great rainforests and warm oceans, life thriving and adapting. The Mulcahy themselves had evolved a strong resistance to the toxins and poisons of the predators in the jungle, and had tremendous lung capacity, which in their history allowed their race to dive deep into the oceans for the clams and oysters which provided much of the sustenance. Now, they were known more for their mastery of the sciences and biology, their homeworld providing a vast array of unique organic compounds that were useful for a wide variety of ailments and effects. "I don't think it'll ever cease to amaze me, and certainly when it does, I will know it is time to retire," Lorgrim said honestly. He looked up at the slim and taller Mulcahy, for Apollonians grew up under an immense gravity of their planet. So, although almost a full 2 feet shorter than the Admiral, Lorgrim would have bet he outweighed his counterpart at least 3 to 1. It took quite a while to get used to the lower gravity on the communal decks of the space station, but Lorgrim was still a mass of muscle that could just as easily lift massive supply crates as robotic assistants the Mulcahy used. Lorgrim looked at the bright flash, indicating a ship transmitting into the station's orbit. "It appears as though the Mandalax have finally decided to show up. Do you know, it was said that the first Apollonians first made contact with them, they refused to believe that we had actually discovered faster-than-light travel. All those years in space, they were almost indignant that they hadn't discovered it first." "It is understandable. The Mandalux have been in space far longer than any of us. It is said that most of them never even experienced real gravity." Lorgrim knew this to be true, even if he knew the story of first contact was perhaps somewhat apocryphal. The Mandalux were said to have left their planet thousands of years ago. According to their legends, the ancients came to them and gifted them with the ability to escape their dying star, and granted them a new home amongst the stars. They were resourceful, cargo holds full of ore and raw materials full of whatever they could find from asteroids and space debris. It was said that if you gave a Mandalek 2 days and a screwdriver, they would fix any problems on your ship, both the ones you did know about and the ones you didn't. Their bodies were adapted moving around ships and living in 0G. Long arms and delicate fingers allowed them fantastic dexterity, and their thin frames required only half the calories of most races, and a tenth of what Lorgrim consumed to keep his massive body in shape. In addition, they were able to enter an almost trance-like hibernation when resources were scarce. The soft hum of the automat door signaled another arrival to the viewing tank. "It is a momentous day, and yet here you two are, as quiet as a poldak and a leap lily," Neither of the two had the faintest idea of what exactly that meant, but the Spinicians were known for their, flavorful language. Why, yes, well, if we had as much fun as your crew, I can say that I don't think that we will ever get all done. I am glad that you could take the time to join us in our more mundane downtime, Ambassador Creighton, Lorgrim commented without turning around. It was said most envoys of Spoonia rarely lasted a full year before succumbing to exhaustion. The planet was cold and harsh for much of the year, but although the dual suns of their system provided little warmth, it did allow for a 33-hour day, with the longest nights of the year lasting only 3 hours. As such, Spinicians were a bit bulkier and covered almost fully in a thick coat of brown or white hair that provided insulation, and they had adapted to only a few hours of rest per day, which instead of extra work shifts, they devoted up to more entertaining activities. Lorgrim continued to look out the window. His eyes could make out the ships of 23 different races, different cultures, different people, and even now there was still much more of the galaxy to explore. And yet, despite all their differences, there had yet to be a full-scale conflict since the signing of the first accords between the Apollonians and the Ibaimai. Some scholars try to attribute this to the technological prowess and the might of the FTL drive, but most believed that it was something else. For despite their differences, there was a remarkable similarity amongst the races of the Accord, bipedal, predatory species for the most part, and all evolved from remarkably similar DNA structures. Creighton took a place next to the pair and spoke, almost as if he could read Lorgrim's thoughts. I wonder if this is what the ancients would have hoped for when they traveled the stars alone. Did they foresee this future when they passed through the galaxy, do you think? Lorgrim wasn't sure. The ancients. It was almost 40 years, and if Lorgrim's memory of childhood history classes was correct, not until the Accords included 12 races that any connection was made. The scholars of the Shanghaian and the first discovered that each of the races had certain fairy tales, stories, or legends of a group of travelers now known as the Ancients. Even now, scholars spend their whole lives attempting to collate, collect, and understand these accounts. But the general theme of most of the stories was that the Ancients visited the planets and civilizations, in many cases, gifted technology and innovations to save the populations or help them grow. But what happened to these ancients is always unknown. In some stories, it is said that they are travelers from a lost home. In others, they are explorers and wanderers. In historical times, they were seen as gods or deities by some. Now, in an age that Lorgrim hoped was more enlightened, they are seen as the first starfarers, the first ones to travel the galaxy, although the stories were the only signs of their passage. Despite vast resources spent exploring the galaxy, there were no colonies, no ships, not even abandoned wreckage or signs left behind. They came, brought knowledge and hope to the inhabitants of many worlds, and then left. Not a single intelligent race found was left untouched by their presence. Yet, for the breadth of their reach, it seemed that there was no trace left to be found. I hope so, Ambassador. However, with the arrival of the Mendelek cruiser, I believe it is almost time for me to actually do some work. New planets to discover, new worlds to set foot upon. And so I shall take my leave. Be sure to have a drink waiting for me when I get back, Lorgrim said, bowing to take his leave. For he did enjoy the company of the Ambassador, even if he could only tolerate it in short bursts. And he wasn't lying. For although it was said that the Mendelek had never been on time, it was also said that they always left early, truly travelers at heart. This would be Lorgrim's 51st expedition that was set to spend nearly a year traveling to some of the furthest reaches of the explored space, which, if he was honest with himself, that was precisely where he enjoyed being. Although he would enjoy quite a bit more once he was back into artificial gravity, which didn't make him feel like he could fly away with every step. Lorgrim couldn't say that he was surprised. The vast majority of systems that they journeyed to were absent of any noticeable life. Almost 90% of most expeditions were just routine scans for future scientists, administrators, and officials to look over. They would document current conditions, any life if it existed, and the general state of any orbiting bodies, so that the Environmental Council would be able to determine whether or not any further visits would have any detrimental effects and what resources could be efficiently gathered. The particular system that they were surveying now was a white dwarf with several gas giants orbiting in outer reaches, and a single rocky planet. Initial scans had turned up little. There were some indications of microbial life on several moons. However, Lorgrim felt some unease as he read the most recent report from the drone scan of the sole rocky planet. The surface was devoid of life, for the cold core had long since stopped spinning and the star had stripped away any atmosphere. Lorgrim had seen 100 of the same world. However, something was off. To be honest, something had been off since they began the first scans of the system. Containing 2 orbiting belts of asteroids and gas giants of the system had hundreds of moons. The composition reports were odd. Although there was a significant amount of rocky asteroids, there were barely trace amounts of iron, ice, and the rarer elements amongst the various bodies in the system. Even then, it was only in the deeper scans that showed the amounts. Then the innermost planet. That was where it clicked. "Lieutenant, prepare a team for a journey to the surface of the first planet as soon as possible." Lorgrim looked again at the data slate in front of him. Not a single solid body in the system was composed of more than 0.05% iron. Yet, on the first planet in the system, in only a single location, there was almost 240 tons of metal close to the surface of the planet. The shuttle slowly descended. They had picked the area closest to the strange readings to examine first, and although the Nobelese science officer wanted to do another scan since the first was obviously faulty, Lorgrim overrode her. The red sand of the planet was still as they landed near the only noticeable feature of the small rock outcropping. According to the shuttle, the drone's initial scans were correct. They were sitting on a significant deposit of metal, some of which was no more than a few meters below the surface. As the rest of the team began setting up gear and equipment, Lorgrim moved to the outcropping. Despite the current state of the atmosphere, it showed signs of erosion and age. As he circled around, he stopped. He stopped because he set into the rough rock face was a door. Not a door like erosion or a cave entrance, but a door. His scanner couldn't penetrate it, but it seemed to be some sort of diamond alloy. He called to the team almost breathlessly, and again they urged caution, but Lorgrim wasn't about to let something like that get in his way. Not in any of the hundreds of planets he had set foot on before had he seen something that was such an enigma. Initial scans appeared to indicate that the door itself was likely well over 4 billion years old. Yet, the door had opened easily. There did not appear to be any locks, defenses, or indications of any inhabitants. A long stairway brought them deeper into the planet's surface, and eventually through an airlock. An airlock! Certainly, there was something here, but where were the people? What race had built this monument to last for a millennia, only to abandon it? Surely, any race capable of such a feat of engineering would have had satellites, radio signals, or some sign of life. Yet, this was the only structure in the entire system that showed any signs of technology or intelligent design. He took off his helmet when his suit assured him that it was safe. A little too much nitrogen, not quite enough oxygen for his taste, but it was certainly breathable for almost all of his crew. Inside the structure was a network of hallways, rooms, and corridors that would certainly take months to fully explore. But markings on the wall seemed to indicate a large chamber located near the middle of the structure, and Lorgrim went straight to it. The large room seemed to be a grand hall of some sort. It reminded Lorgrim of a visit he once made to the Mahagum Museum, where they had displayed the skeletons of giant prehistoric avians that had previously roamed the planet. Except, instead of the fossilized remains of long-dead birds, this held great displays of ships. Lorgrim couldn't be sure of the scale. There must have been at least 1,000 displays surrounding the large dais in the middle of the room. The Terrans had much harder time with the written words than spoken, and so it would still likely be hours, if not days, before they could decipher any of the text surrounding the exhibits. Looking at the models of ships as he passed, he noticed design features and engineering that seemed somewhat familiar. However, he did not see on any of them the trademark orbitals that would have indicated that the ships were able to achieve speeds beyond normal physics. He wondered to himself, where had they all gone? Or more likely, why they had never been built in the first place. Lorgrim walked up to the dais, his suit lights casting strange shadows around the room as he looked at some sort of display panel. Then suddenly, something activated. Lorgrim had not touched anything, so he assumed it must be key to his presence alone, and assumed a somewhat defensive posture as a hologram appeared on the dais and began speaking. Donex electon elkilis ipsen quas palvana, nullum ingetso nec erat valapat is gustus. Lorgrim waited for his autotrance to begin playing the translated speech. The hologram was of two bipedal figures, their skin smooth and almost featureless. One had shorter hair protruding from the top of the head, the other had much longer hair. Although Lorgrim had never seen the race quite like this before, he couldn't say that the features were wholly unfamiliar. 5-fingered hands, front-facing eyes, oddly large ears. Lorgrim's autotrance kicked in. And so, as the sun begins to expand and engulf the unknown, we must move on. We have used up our resources on both foolish wars and great endeavors. The Earth is not what it once was, and we can do nothing but hope that as we venture out into the solar system, we will take with us the knowledge to be better than our ancestors were. And yet, we leave behind this monument, for it was in the earliest days of our race that we first set foot upon unknown. It is fitting that it shall also be the last planet in the system any of us shall ever call home. For generations we have mined, built, and sent ships out, those that you see around you, and although we have little hope to ever see each other again, we cannot abandon our noble endeavor to survive, and perhaps as the future generations make way through the black void and the distance becomes too great for contact, they will nevertheless find new worlds to settle upon and new lives to lead. For years, mankind has listened and waited for the call of other life and called in turn, and yet we were never answered. But we will not go quietly into the night. As the captains of the last ships to leave the system, we leave this last site, a final message should we not survive. As a repository of all that we were, lest we be forgotten to history. This hall, this building, has been created to last until the end of time, and shall be an enduring monument to all those sacrifices and hurdles that were overcome. It is now time that we follow in the paths of those that went out before us. The ESS Apollo, the ESS Marie Curie, the ESS Sputnik, the ESS Shanghai, the ESS Gandhi, the ESS Noble, the ESS Mandela, the ESS Obama. May we one day meet again. End of story. I just want to thank the T5 patrons and channel members. Bob the Dragon, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Estrella the Dreamer, Try Again 95, Fudigiol, Meridian 117, Alithia, Jordan Bucksbaum, Angry Marine, Albarden Gusta, and Barkey. Thank you very much. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. There are links down below, both to support this channel and for the author of this fiction. Anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.